Stand-up comedy, wildly popular now, is not new. Stand-ups first appeared in vaudeville shows, then vaudeville died. Stand-ups moved to nightclubs, then radio, then television. Then there were folk music and jazz clubs, which also featured stand-ups. Those clubs evolved into the comedy club. Now television is fading, the digital world is booming, and stand-ups are at the forefront of this new entertainment format. My guest today is Stephen Rosenfield, Professor Emeritus of Stand-Up and Sketch Comedy at William Patterson University. He's the founding director of the American Comedy Institute, the premier stand-up comedy school in the U.S. His students have included prominent comedians and comedy writers such as Lena Dunham and Jim Gaffigan. And his new book, Mastering Stand-Up, is a must for any aspiring comedian. Stephen says that freedom of speech and tolerance for criticism of the government make the U.S. fertile ground for comics. And these days, we need to laugh. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town in Village 2. Welcome back. Stephen, thank you so much for being my guest.
My pleasure.
I enjoyed and learned so much. I think I'm going to go into stand-up comedy, but I'm not sure I'm right for it. Can anybody learn to be a stand-up comic?
You know, that's an interesting way to phrase it, because I would say, yes, anyone can learn to be a stand-up comic. That doesn't mean that anyone could be a stand-up comic. But you can learn, anyone could learn the crafts that go into comedy writing and comedy performing, yes.
Well, you know, that's the operative word, the craft. What really surprised me was what hard work this was. I always got the feeling that someone like a Seinfeld or a Louis C.K. were naturally funny people when everyone said, oh, you should do stand-up, and they did it. And, you know, got better as they practiced it. But I did not realize how much hard work it took to learn to be a stand-up.
It takes longer to learn to be a stand-up than it is to learn to be a doctor. I mean, it's very common, for instance, when you're talking about comedians. I just had a conversation like this with one of the people at Gotham Comedy Club in the city, and he was talking about a comedian and said, you know, she's good. She's getting really good. She's kind of new. You know, she's been doing it for like 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of new.
5 or 6 years?
Yeah, it is. And I think that there are reasons why it takes that long. You have to master performing stand-up, so all of the techniques of performing need to be mastered, and you also have to really master writing. And that's where people, a lot of times, and this is a sign, you know, I get asked this question all the time, can you teach stand-up? You know, and a lot of times I feel like saying, you know, now that I think about it, I don't think I can. But one of the reasons why stand-ups make such good actors is because they have learned to deliver lines that they have been often saying for years in exactly the same way, in a manner that's so spontaneous that most people think they just walk out on stage and they're just funny people who are talking.
So you're saying that most comedians don't have the same persona off stage. They're really actors.
Yes, I would say that. I'm not sure that I know of one stand-up who's got the same persona on and off stage. I don't think I know a single one. And that developing of persona, that development of who are you behind that microphone also takes years.
Does a comedian have to have one persona to be credible, or can you have different personalities? Like
well, if you have different personalities, you know, stand-up may not be the biggest concern in your life. Well, here's the thing. You can do what are called act-outs, where you're acting out other personalities. I think of somebody like Richard Pryor, who could put a whole neighborhood up on a street.
Right.
On a little stage, or create this nightclub and Pennsylvania know. And he was a great stand-up actor in that there was his persona, there was Richard, and then there were all the characters that Richard performed.
And that's okay. That's kosher.
That's great. But there has to be that kind of home base, that there has to be that vivid home base where people feel like they really, that's Richard doing that.
So you can't confuse your audience as to who's talking, who is this person now?
No, that doesn't work.
Did you ever work with anyone and tell them this is not for you?
Well, first of all, I have learned to be humble in this regard. What's crucial, really, is this. For reasons that I don't understand, some people just keep growing. They just keep getting better and better and better and better. And what you may see from them initially may look like, it's time for plan B to go into effect in their lives, but they just keep improving. And
have you ever been able to tell someone or give somebody a clue like, this is not working, try this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the advantages in comedy and in stand-up is we know when it's not working. I mean, it couldn't be clearer.
Well, this is an unusual relationship with an audience here.
Well, it's one of the advantages that I think in terms of being a writer or a creator, artist, a performer in comedy is that there's a very clear metric system, okay? You can paint a painting and not know. I mean, Van Gogh sold one painting in his life and his brother bought it, okay? You cannot be an undiscovered stand-up. You can't, no matter how weird you are. I mean, nobody was stranger than Andy Kaufman. And Andy Kaufman was a gigantic star. They laugh or they don't laugh. The system of evaluating your success is really clear. So yeah, we say that stand-up, comedy is not written, comedy is rewritten. It's constantly evolving and changing based on the way it's received by the audience.
Is there anything different about comedy today than when comedy started? I mean, we started in vaudeville, right? So it was slapstick, or what I know is slapstick, funny one-liners and take my wife sort of things, right? And now I think people expect more from comedians.
I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. Very often in the days of vaudeville, even though there were always great comedians at any point in time, there always are terrific comedians. But there was a time when comedians essentially were joke tellers. They would tell jokes. It wasn't really about their lives. They were jokes. And that changed. That has changed, and now people look to comedians more to hear about their own lives or their take on what's going on politically or culturally. It's become way more personal than it used to be, for sure.
And deeper. It's not just a string of funny jokes or mildly funny jokes.
I would say, the only reason why I'm hesitant about characterizing it as deeper is because there were great comedians in vaudeville. And I don't know, to me, Jack Benny was deep. When it comes to comedy, when it comes to his, the Marx Brothers for me is as deep as it gets. So, yes, it's changed, but there were great comedians who were doing fantastic comedy when it was being done in vaudeville.
I'm sure you're right. I guess with the political situation being what it is today, and with the likes of the Jon Stewart or Trevor Noah or John Oliver, they're playing more of a role of a truth teller who's trying to make it funny. Sadly, a lot of it's not really funny, and it's serious and it's concerning, but they're keeping us amused. What category would you put them in? Are they the court jester telling the truth?
No, certainly not the court jester, because they ain't working for the king. I can tell you that. Because the king is ticked off big time by what's out there. politics has certainly been a topic of stand-up for a long time. And part of the reason why people love to watch the late-night talk shows is because they know they're going to hear the news from the perspective of whoever the host is. And that can be something to look forward to hear what their take is on these things. So and I think that's a big reason why people love those shows now. And for a younger generation, those shows are a primary source of how they get the news.
Is that right?
Definitely, when Jon Stewart in The Daily Show was one of the primary ways that like millennials were getting their news. They would watch that to get their news because he did report the news. I mean, his take on
version of the news.
Well, the thing somebody like Jon Stewart would do is that, you know, part of his technique is he sat at the desk like a regular news anchor, and there would be the clip, okay? But in a regular news situation, the host would look at the camera and just go on to the next piece. But with Jon Stewart, you know, he'd look at it and he'd go, "Did you just hear? You know, did I hear that right? That can't be what I just heard." So it was. I would say that there was a lot of accurate news going on in his show and in Trevor Noah's show. They are reporting the news.
But they're also highlighting portions of it or replaying inconsistencies for people who might have missed them, or dangerous notes for people who don't want to notice them. They're highlighting something, whereas you say in a network news show or any news show, the anchor just goes on to the next story. I mean, he's just reading whatever's written for him. So it's a different level of responsibility and a different level of objectiveness.
You know, I think you'd get some pushback. You know, when there was that there was that sort of famous friendly feud between O'Reilly and Jon Stewart with the O'Reilly factor, and was the O'Reilly factor more accurate news than the news that Jon Stewart was presenting in his shows? A lot of, I think, very thoughtful people would say that Stewart's show was more accurate from how it was reporting the news than O'Reilly's show was.
But then you'll have other people who'll say just the opposite, that O'Reilly was their source of news and that Jon Stewart was just clowning around.
I don't eat dinner with those people. I wouldn't know. If you think that Fox News is, if you think Fox News at night is an accurate reporting of what's going on?
Well, I personally don't, and yet I have encountered many people who do.
I understand.
And I agree with you, I don't cotton to them and I don't spend a lot of time with them, but they come into my life.
Absolutely, and they won't. They will not enjoy these other shows, just as we would not, or I would not, enjoy having Fox News as my primary source of news. So be it.
So be it. You know, it used to be there were some rules, or at least there seemed to be some rules about what you could and couldn't talk about in comedy. Does that exist anymore today?
Boy, pretty much not. You know, it's interesting because when you look at the times when there was a very vibrant kind of underground going on, you know, in comedy, in music, one of the things that you have to have for you to have an underground is an overground. You know, you need some kind of...
You need some bar, right?
You need some...
What's allowed, what's not allowed.
Right, exactly. You need something saying you can't do that in order to go, oh, yes, I can. And I think it's a really interesting question because, you know, Louis C.K. was doing, I think in his last performance on Saturday Night Live, he was doing pedophile jokes. And if you, I mean, that's network television. And if you can be hearing pedophile jokes on network television, then, you know, where's the taboos?
And there was no censor. Nobody stopped him.
Nobody stopped them. I mean, there are censors, but it passed the bar,
right?
For sure.
How does a comedian decide when they want to be really renegades? And I think of the recent snafu with Kathy Griffin.
Oh.
Now, she was a pretty well-known comedian who seems to have done herself in.
Yeah, she has. I think she has, yes.
I mean, I don't know if there's a second life or, if she'll come
We'll
back.
see. We'll see. It's possible.
But yet, did she do something that was so much more outrageous than others have done? Was she being held to a standard that was not fair?
I don't know. I mean, that idea of chopping off Trump's head. First of all, it wasn't funny. Let me say that.
But the audience decides that, whether it's funny or not, and you can turn it off or not.
Right, exactly. So I think part of the problem with what she did is that she couldn't make it funny. She really couldn't. And I think anything's possible, but that would be a tough one.
Are we holding a comedian to a standard that we're not holding a leader to? I mean, would you say that Trump's,
I don't think we're holding our leader to any standards at all.
Okay, we're going in a different direction.
Okay.
But I keep saying that's a comedian, and it was a bad joke, and I don't like her, so I'm not going to watch her, which is my prerogative.
Right. There's a difference here. Okay. There's a difference because there's a difference between somebody like Lenny Bruce, who is a renegade, and he did some of the edgiest material that has ever been done. And I remember jipping Mamaroneck High School to go see him in the city. It came from a genuine sense of moral outrage at certain hypocrisies. He really felt strongly about it, as opposed to someone who's like decided, I want to be edgy, so what can I say that's going to be edgy? Let me try to be as offensive. That's different from the people that were really the masters of edgy comedy, because it was coming out of some real moral core that they had. And as comedians, they couldn't tolerate the level of hypocrisy that often goes around certain areas that are taboo to talk about.
Would you characterize most really good comedians, when I say good, successful, enduring comedians, as people who are almost philosophers?
No. They're all sorts of people. There's no, they're all over the place. No, I mean, I know stand-ups who probably don't know what the word philosopher means. And some of them are very funny. But no, I don't think so. I think what they have in common is that I think for some people, comedy is like a language that they speak. They think funny, they say funny. That's what they have in common, is that that gear that they're in is one where they communicate with comedy about whatever it is they want to communicate about.
There's an old canard, is it, that most comedians are sad? Is that true in your experience?
No. Most comedians aren't anything. They're all sorts of people. No.
They're doctors and lawyers in another life.
Right. I mean, they come from all different backgrounds. They have completely different personalities. I don't know that you could really characterize them that way. I think they need to express themselves through comedy. That's the one thing they have in common.
Now, do you find that any good comedian is someone who has to keep working at his craft? I mean, what impressed me the most in your book is how much you implored your students to write jokes. I always think of a stand-up as someone who stands up and tells jokes. But no, to write it, to recraft it, to revise it, to keep retiming it. And are your students willing to put in that kind of energy?
They have no choice. If they want, it's not like there's an option, because there are all sorts of ways of, obviously, of being a stand-up and doing stand-up. But part of it that's just part of the job is that you have to be prepared and look forward to a lot of work. A lot of what people have in the past described as talent, now that it's being looked upon in ways that were not available to people who studied these things in the past, a lot of it is work. These people work harder than their colleagues do. Groucho Marx would not go into a studio and shoot a film, he wouldn't do that. He would take the writers with him and his brothers on the road. They would go to the vaudeville houses across the country, and they would work on that script until it was terrific. And then they'd go in the studio. Well, you know, who did that? I mean, he was working harder, which is not in any way to minimize talent. But I'm saying that in this endeavor involves ongoing hard work that people who are comedians love doing. So
or do it, whether they love it or not, they do it.
I don't think you could do it. I really don't think you could do it if you didn't love it, because you're spending so much of your time and so much of your spirit is involved in it.
But you're also getting immediate feedback. I mean, what's it like to be a comedian in a room and be bombing?
Well, it's not like Sunday in the Park, Alice, I can assure you.
I mean, it's like immediate feedback, and it's not good.
It's not good, and it's inevitable. It happens to everybody, and there are things you can learn so that when you get into that situation again, you're better able to handle it and turn it around.
But unlike the actors you talked about earlier, you don't have to wait for the reviews to come out, because you know whether you reached your audience, whether they had a good time with you or not.
Something even better is that there are no reviews, which is really great, because stand-up is really the last vital vestige of vaudeville in that people have their entire careers to perfect their act. There is no opening night. There's just another show. There's just the next gig. And that's a great environment to really develop the art and craft of.
So if you keep the perspective that it's a long view, we're on this long road, and every night's not going to be great.
Every night is not going to be great for anybody. And there are always things to learn. There are always things you can learn.
Is it harder for a woman to be a stand-up?
Yeah, I think it always has been harder for women to be stand-ups. You know, it was I had an interesting conversation with Silver Friedman, who with her husband, they opened the first comedy club, and they opened up the original Improv. And I asked her, you know, why don't you book more women? I didn't understand why she wasn't booking more women. And she said something that really interested me. She said that the women in the audience are capable of identifying with the male stand-ups and the female stand-ups. But the men in the audience, she felt, really had trouble identifying. They didn't have that ability to sort of, that was her reason. So yeah, it has been traditionally much harder for women. And another thing about stand-up is that if you're a road comic, if you're a comedian who, you know, making your money from performing in clubs around the country, it's a pretty tough, that's a tough life.
Well, we're in the 21st century, and women are winning.
Now you tell me.
See, I could be a stand-up, right? But I mean, women are putting in the hard work for the careers they want. Is the deck stacked against women?
I don't think that the deck is stacked against women. I don't. I think that there still is the notion that a lot of people who book clubs feel that women are going to be a harder sell than a guy is for whatever reason. You know, I don't know what their reasoning is. I know what Silver's reasoning was. So I think it's harder.
Then what has changed for people like an Amy Schumer or a Sarah Silverman, who have done just great?
Yeah. Well, women have always done just great. It's just far fewer women than men.
But why did they make it? Was it just luck?
No, heavens, no. You know, it's usually the same reason. They're incredibly talented and they're incredibly skilled.
And hardworking.
Because
I mean, I tend to doubt that the Comedy Cellar would turn away Sarah Silverman if she showed up and said, I want to go on tonight.
Absolutely not, of course not.
I want to give it a try. I'm working out some new material.
Absolutely. No, that would never happen. And I would, and I would say to any woman who's interested in doing stand-up, if you love it, do it. You know, Don't worry about the odds. I heard a great story about Jack Lemmon. Some big star came to Harvard when Lemmon was an undergraduate there, and he gave this talk, and the guy said, you know, this is really a tough business. And he said, you know, your odds of making it are like 1 in a million, and Jack Lemmon said, I thought those are pretty good odds.
So he just was bad at math.
I guess what I'm saying is, you know.
Glass empty, glass full.
I'm saying, listen, it's hard for everybody. And if you love doing it, and you're good at it, and you pursue it, you'll find your place there. It's not a reason for anybody not to do it.
How has the internet changed comedy?
It's interesting, actually. Well, it's changed it in so many ways. It's giving people, I have students who use the internet to get to places that would have been impossible to get to in the past.
How so? What do you mean get to?
When Jay Leno was at The Tonight Show, he hired 2 guys to go through the internet and find some...
Find material for him?
No, find comedians, not material. Find comics who they would then book on their show. That's what I mean.
So it's changed the whole way of auditioning.
It's changed the way of auditioning. And you can, you know, wherever you are as a stand-up, you can audition for clubs all over the world just with your computer.
Amazing.
And they look at it. They may not look at it very long. If they don't like it, they may look at it for 15 or 20 seconds, but they will look at it. And if they like it, they'll book you.
So you don't need an agent. I mean, it's eliminated a whole level of middlemen.
You don't need an agent for that. And you really never did need an agent for that aspect of your work. Where you start needing an agent is, you know, when you get your own television show or...
And negotiating the prices, and your fees, and compensation.
But the work that you get in clubs is pretty... The only time where you would need an agent is that the real major headliners get paid staggering amounts of money in major clubs. At Gotham, a major headliner for the weekend may get $70,000.
Pretty good.
And there you want to have, that would be a time where you would want to have an agent by your side.
To negotiate that. But it's taken a whole step away from getting your foot in the door.
It's a lot easier, absolutely.
You can get looked at. How did you get into comedy? Were you a stand-up yourself?
No, I wasn't, actually. I really backed into it. I came at it as a theater director. I had a theater here called the Cellar Door Theater, by the way, for many years.
Here meaning in Larchmont, Mamaroneck, where we happen to be recording.
Right, exactly. Right. And when I wasn't directing, I would coach actors. And in the 80s, which is when the big boom happened, some stand-ups came to get coached. And when I was working with them, I realized it wasn't simply a performance issue the way it is for actors. I mean, you got your script, and you got to do it. It was also writing, so I started rewriting with them. And I think maybe because my background was in the theater, I think I was skilled at being able to write in other people's voices. I could pick up the way they spoke, and that would be, you know, part of what I would be writing with them.
Wow.
So that's how I got into it. I really backed into it.
Well, what a great career. One question, and we are out of time. Do you have a favorite comedian, or is it like children and you don't want to disclose?
You got that right.
Okay.
Thank you for giving me
giving you an out.
A graceful way not to answer that question.
I wish I had more time. Thank you so much for being
pleasure.
my guest, Stephen. Good luck with your book, Mastering Stand-Up. I know it'll be a great success. I enjoyed it. Maybe I'll have a new career.
Maybe.
Who knows?
I'll give you my card.
Thanks at home for watching. I'm Alice Bloom. We'll see you next time.